Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
My name's Cricket and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. This way? Is that better? Good. Just take a second and look around you very quietly and ask yourself if God moves in mysterious ways His wonders to perform. Look at us, a bunch of female drunks gathered in one room, and we can hear an infant whimper, and it gladdens our heart. We can look at one another. I've made friends this weekend. My Hawaiian friends gave me a lei. That's nothing like I used to get when you were talking about leis. It's miraculous. I had a waiter sneak me an ashtray, told me put it in my purse, and as soon as I wanted a cigarette, dig it out. The reason being, he saw me under the table last night smoking. That's an improvement for what I used to do under tables, too. My sobriety date is October the 19th of 1969. I turned 22 years alive last October, and I've turned 50 years living last August. So I'm half of 100, and I'm enjoying it. I always like to try to do it the way the Big Book says, disclose in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like today. Before I ever took that first drink of alcohol, Angie and I have some things in common. She called herself a fruit picker. I was a crop follower. I was born into a family of people that society termed illiterate. I didn't really know what that meant until I grew. And that meant that we didn't know how to read or write. And that was a real accurate definition. My mother's a full-blooded black Irish female, and she stands about yay high, a very superstitious woman. She believes that there's one child in every family born evil. And you determine that child by the lightest weight at birth. I weighed 2.5 pounds. Here came evil. I never met my natural father, but I have two knowledges of the man. He sired 17 children, so I know he was very potent. None of us met him, so I know he knew how to leave. My mother married a man that had a third-grade education, and the only way he could support her was by following crops all over the United States of America. And I liked crop following. I liked that way of life. I liked not having plumbing, not having electricity, moving. I liked all of that part of crop following. The only thing I didn't like about being a crop follower's child was that as the vegetable and fruit seasons changed, we moved. And each time we moved, society said we had to start school. Every new school I started, I was either the shortest girl in that classroom or I was the tallest girl. Full grown, I'm 5'3", so I want to go back to that school. I was too fat or I was too skinny. There was always something on the outside of Cricket that made me feel separated from other children. I wanted people to like me. I wanted people not to be afraid to touch me. I wanted people to care about me. And see, I figured it out. I knew what was wrong with me. I didn't have blonde hair. And I didn't have big brown eyes. Because if I had blonde hair and big brown eyes, then people would like me. Because we didn't have running water and the proper way to have physical hygiene in our home, my teeth had rotted out. And I had pimples all over my face. And we went to church, and we went twice a year. And the reason we went, and it was at Thanksgiving and Christmas, the reason we went those 2 times a year were because ministers stood behind a podium much like this. And they shared a message that was probably very, very true. They didn't know what the little crop follower heard. They said to me when I sat out there, anything I asked for in the name of Jesus, I'd receive it. Probably their words were true. But see, what I asked for in the name of Jesus was clear skin. Because if my skin were clear, other people would like me. And I went home and I prayed. And I put my finger on a spot that didn't have a zit. And I said, in the name of Jesus, when I wake up in the morning, make the rest of my face as clear as this spot is right here. And I knew that Jesus couldn't get confused because I pointed it out to him. And when I got up in the morning with the childhood belief, the childlike faith, I ran to the mirror and I expected to have clear skin. And what I had was a pimple right where I prayed. And so my immediate prayer after that went something like this. Dear God, sir. See, I don't believe in you, sir. I don't believe in family. I don't believe in cleanliness. I don't believe in goodness. But just in case you are somewhere, just in case, sir, help me never to feel again. I don't want any favors from you either, sir. I don't even want to feel bad. I just don't ever want to feel again. 2 of my older brothers at this time had become armed robbers. And in our homes, we cooked on an old wood stove. That's what everything was warmed and cooked and heated on, was an old wood stove. I was raised in the type of family that when the sun goes down and children run into the back door and the screen door bounces and they say, Mom, I'm home. It's getting dark outside. We children ran outside. We didn't know what was out there in the dark, but it didn't scare us because of what was inside in the light. We weren't frightened of outside. But I found a hiding place when I was a child. And my hiding place was behind that old wood stove. And when my brothers started robbing and shooting, they hid their guns behind my wood stove. They hid their money behind my wood stove. They stole my hiding place. And if I didn't tell on them, they introduced me to a thing in a brown paper sack. And it was in a brown bottle. And it was called whiskey. And they gave it to me in exchange for me not telling. And I took the lid off of that whiskey. It was my first drink of alcohol. I was 12 years of age. And I drank the entire bottle. And I will never forget it. I remember how that whiskey burned all the way down. It burned my throat, it burned my chest, it burned my stomach, it burned my fingertips. I also remember how it burned all the way back up again. And I repeated it until more stayed down than came back up. Behind my wood stove, I had created a soap opera. Behind my wood stove, I could close my eyes and turn off the whole world, and I could pretend. And I would pretend I was Roy Rogers and Dale Evans' daughter. And I would pretend I had blonde hair. And I would pretend I had brown eyes. Whiskey took my pretend away. With whiskey, I didn't need to pretend, nor did I want to pretend ever again. It didn't matter. I started leaving home at that age, and I started living on the streets of Denver. And I started doing what any young female alcoholic has to do to get that next drink of alcohol. The state of Colorado decided that I need to go to a place called the Reform School. And they sent me there for being incorrigible, which meant that no adult could handle me. That's pretty awesome power to give to a 13-year-old kid. I stayed in the state reform school for a year, and I never wanted to leave. They had all their plumbing was indoors. I was introduced to my first toothbrush. There was one person to a bed. There were sheets on the bed. There were 3 meals a day. And nobody hit you. Nothing came out from darkness to hurt. Nothing. And they told me I had to go home. Never in my life have I gone to my mother's home without knocking on her door. And I remember when I got home, I hadn't seen my mother in a year. And I went up and I knocked on her door. And she said, "Come in." And I walked in and I said, "Mama, I'm home. She said, yep, I know. See, I wanted my mama to say, I'm glad. I wanted my mama to stand up. I wanted my mama to hug me. My mama said, yep, I know. And I looked at my mother and I said, Mama, I can't stay here. And she looked at me and she said, yep, I know. I wanted her to say, yeah, you can. You're my child. You're not going anywhere. We'll do this thing together. Instead, she said, yep, I know. I said, Mama, I'm leaving. And she said, yep, I know. And I walked out her door. I stayed on the streets again until about the age of 16, doing whatever I had to do to get that next drink of alcohol. At the age of 16, the state of Colorado stepped in one more time. They decided that I needed to be put into the Colorado State Hospital. They call it a hospital because they're embarrassed to say it's an insane asylum. It was an insane asylum. It was not a treatment center. In my opinion, it was not a hospital. They did not recognize teenage alcoholism, so they placed me there under the diagnosis of schizophrenic with paranoid reaction with psychotic tendencies. And I have a real problem when you call me something I don't understand. We're going to, and most of my life I've been called things I don't understand. I didn't know until I had several years of sobriety that schizophrenic meant I was two-faced. I am. Paranoid meant you talk behind my back. You do. Psychotic means I'd rather see you dead than me, and I would. See, I'm not a very magnanimous person. If someone in this room has to get drunk tonight, I hope it's one of y'all. Because I can't make it again. God gave me one shot at Alcoholics Anonymous in sobriety, and that was October the 19th of 1969. And I'm not generous enough to say I'm willing to be the one here that has to get drunk. Sorry. When I went to the Colorado State Insane Asylum, they decided that I needed Valium, 10 milligrams, 4 times a day. They decided I needed Librium, 25 milligrams, 4 times a day. They decided I needed Thorazine, 50 milligrams, 4 times a day. For 18 months, I didn't want to drink. They also agreed, and this is in the middle 50s, early 50s, they agreed that I should have electric shock treatments Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 18 months. I'm not an idiot. I've got legitimate fried brains. And that's okay today. But let me tell you about the little girl that walked into that place. A little girl who knew how to do absolutely nothing. A little girl who had a prayer and was doing everything in her power to have that prayer answered. A little girl who wanted to be warm. A little girl who wanted to be clean. A little girl who wanted teeth. A little girl who wanted to have her hair look like other little girls. A little girl who wanted you not to wipe your hands when you touched hers. A little girl that somebody, somewhere, cared about. And that's exactly what left that Colorado State Insane Asylum. There was an odor of fear. And I don't know how many of you can identify with me on that. But the moment I walked into that door, fear permeated my brain. It permeated the pores of my skin. And fear destroyed the soul of Cricket. 18 months later, with my 3 shock treatments a week, my daily medication, the psychiatrist told me I was cured. And they released me. I weighed approximately 250 pounds. I could not get out into the sunshine because of the Thorazine. And they gave me absolutely nothing except a ticket from Pueblo, Colorado to Denver. The lace-up shoes, the ankle socks, and the button-down house dress. The people on the bus shied away from me. And I didn't understand why. I hadn't done anything to them. Why were they frightened of me? Why did they find my presence abhorrent? Did I smell bad? Was it my looks? What was wrong? I could not understand it. Once again, I went to my mother's home, and it was a replay. Mama, I'm home. Yep, I know. Once again, Mama, I can't stay here. Only this time, I'm never coming back. Never coming back, Mama. Yep, I know. And I left my mother's house in Denver, Colorado, and I traveled all over the United States via the Greyhound bus. And I did whatever I had to do with whoever I had to do it with to get that next drink of alcohol. My prayer was being answered. 2 weeks before I joined Alcoholics Anonymous, I was sitting in a restaurant with a man, and somebody walked up and shot him in the face while we were eating dinner. I got a little bit angry, not because he got shot. It got on my French fries. See, Cricket had died. I had died. I could no longer see. I could no longer walk. Cricket, for all practical purposes, had died. I hurt people, and I didn't want to, and could not stop it. I said things I didn't want to say, and could not stop myself. I stole from people, and could not stop myself. I challenged anybody anywhere to try to be good to me, because I would turn that goodness into hatred. If I had to do anything to make you hate me, I could deal with that because that was familiar. If you tried to be kind to me, I would destroy it because I could not accept it any longer. I had no desire at all to change my way of life. I did not come to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous appointed by a judge. I did not come here because of a husband. Nobody marries working girls. I didn't come here because of a family that cared or an employer. I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous on a dare. And that dare was issued to me in a beer joint. I've never been a housewife drunk. I do not like terms like high-bottom drunks and low-bottom drunks. I don't think that's an applicable term when it comes to a disease of alcoholism that makes a housewife. How many wives have slept with their husbands when they didn't want to just so they could have that checkbook so they could get their next drink of alcohol? That's what I did on the streets. How many wives have lied to their children? Did they want to? No. I did that on the streets. How many wives went to bed dirty? In here. I did that on the streets. So don't tell me high bottom, low bottom. It's all the same, my friends. Alcohol creates real, sick, spiritual people. Alcoholism causes us to do things we regret the rest of our lives. It causes us to do things we feel shame for. It causes us to do things we feel guilty for. And thank God the men and women before Cricket covered that in the steps. You know, I have to make amends for those things. I have to. I do feel shame for some of my actions. I'm not ashamed of me. You know, I'm not ashamed of what Cricket was. I'm not ashamed of what I am. I'm not. When this man came to me in this beer joint, I was trying to do what most alcoholic females in beer joints do. I was trying to get that next drink of alcohol. And he looked at me and he said, Cricket, I'm not buying what you're selling. And I said, sucker, I've never given it away.
You know, I didn't know you were supposed to till I got in AA. I tell the women I sponsor, don't give it to them, sell it. You know, it's worth something to me. I'm sorry, it's always been worth something to me. The men in my group don't like me real well. There's not a lot of freebies running around for him. When this man told me he wasn't buying what I was selling, but he and his wife had watched me every Saturday night for about a year, and they thought I was an alcoholic, I thought, come on. You know, there's nothing wrong with me. And he said, Cricket, you do things that you don't remember doing. And I thought, so does everybody else, don't they? You're here every morning. You're on the streets all day long. You're here every night. We want you to go to a thing with us tomorrow night called Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, okay, big boy, I'll do that. And he said, we don't want you to drink tomorrow morning. Can you do that? I said, yep, no problem. I can quit drinking whenever I want to. And he said, okay, get up in the morning, don't take that first drink of alcohol, and meet us at 1311 York Street tonight. That's in Denver, Colorado. I said, no problem. No problem. I can do that, big boy. And I went home, and I went to bed. The next morning I woke, and I did what I had done every day for 10 years. I woke up, scraped the puke out of my eyebrows, and reached to the side of my bed for that bottle, lying there in my own filth, because that's where I should be, because that's what I was. And I raised that bottle up to my lips. As I understand it today, my God would not let me take the first drink of alcohol that day. I could not take that first drink of alcohol. I went to the restroom and I had the dry heaves and I did all of these things, and I sat there and I thought, this sucks. That man called my house at noon that day and he said, Cricket, had a drink? I said, no, big boy. Told you I didn't need to. I don't want to. He said, do you need a ride to the meeting? I said, I don't need anything from you. Told you I'd be at your meeting. I'll be there. And I called a yellow cab as it got nearer 8 o'clock. And I told that taxi driver, sir, I need to go to 1311 York Street. He said, okay. It was snowing in Denver that evening. And the closer I got to 1311 York, my brain started working. I'm a crop follower's kid. And I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I never knew prejudice until I grew up and moved to Texas. And I'm thinking, anonymous, anonymous, that sounds like the KKK. I don't want any part of it. And I really believed that. I was afraid if I walked into a meeting of AA, they'd have white sheets. They'd be doing what even would be bizarre things for my imagination. And I told the taxi driver, I said, sir, I gave you the wrong address. Right next to the York Street group is a little apartment building. Used to be. I don't know. I haven't been there in years. And I had this taxi driver let me out in front of that apartment. And I walked into the foyer and I watched out the plate glass window until his tail lights turned the corner and I could no longer see him in the snow in the dark. As soon as his taillights turned the corner, I walked up the street. I climbed up the stairs to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I walked into a room, and a lady walked up to me, and she had red hair. And she said, hi, I'm Sharon. Are you an alkie? And I knocked her on her rear end. I was a real good newcomer. She got up, and the men were telling her, now, Sharon, you're going to have to work with her. Sharon saying, I'm not willing. And they said, tell her that we care. And Sharon's, They care. And I thought, hot diggity. I'm glad they do. Because when people care, I can destroy it. I can destroy them. That's their weakness, if they told me they care. And this lady told me they care. And I sat there during that meeting. I didn't see anything I wanted. I didn't hear anything I wanted to hear. They laughed at jokes I hadn't laughed at since I was 4 years of age. And they sit there and they pass that little brown wicker basket, and I sit in the back row. And they said, if you got it, put it in. If you need it, take it out. I was very needy. They used to say, they don't say that when I attend groups. They may say it when I'm not there, but when I'm at a meeting, people don't tell me if I need it, take it out. They used to say, take what you can use now. What you can't use now, come back and get it later. I took their adding machine. I took their typewriter. I did everything I could. I stayed sober quite a while, 3 days. My third day of continuous sobriety, I was sitting in a meeting at York Street, and all of a sudden, I went into DTs. But I didn't want a drink. I didn't need a drink. And I was going to those meetings, and I was just waiting for AA to kick me out. Because, see, I sit there and I listened to people. And they said, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I thought about it, and thought, that's no problem. When I go back to my beer joint on East Colfax, the Red Beret, and I sit on my bar stool, I'm going to ask the bartender to bring me 2 whiskeys. And he's going to set them down at the same time, and I'm going to throw the first one in the trash, and AA doesn't know what they're talking about because I'll never take a drink of the first one. That made sense to me at that time in my life. I don't tell people it's the first drink that gets you drunk. I tell people a drink will get you drunk. When I got through the DTs, which was about 72 hours later, and we did the orange juice and honey, and people sat with us. There's a group, and this lady earlier this evening had mentioned it. Now I know why I've never been asked to join. It's a group, a hidden society amongst ours called Bleeding Deacons. And I found out one of the requirements tonight, 25 years, I've got 3 to go. This group of men, back then there weren't any women bleeding deacons. This group of men approached me, and at that time I had about a week of continuous sobriety. And they said, Cricket, we're not going to put up with your stuff anymore. A gentleman named Reed was the head bleeding deacon. I didn't know that's what he was at the time. He was just a wonderful white-haired man. And he said, we've got some things we've got to change. And see, I knew what was coming. They were going to kick me out because he wasn't going to put up with my stuff anymore. And he said, Cricket, you have to turn back all the money you've panhandled. He said, you have to give back the adding machine, the typewriter. You've got to pay to have the Coke machine repaired. You cannot turn tables over during discussion meetings any longer. You can't watch out the window on Thursday night when we have the Al-Anon meetings and wait till the little Al-Anon walks in and run over and sit down on her husband's lap. And he said, we cannot kick you out of our fellowship. And it was like somebody kicked me in the guts. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Cricket, our traditions won't allow us. See, and tradition at that time, to me, sounded like a social disease. In fact, sometimes the way they're used today, I wonder if maybe I was right. Our traditions won't let us kick you out if you have a desire to stop drinking. Once again, the responsibility for me being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous was on my back. Sharon had been assigned to read me several questions. And I had filled out this questionnaire. And it said, has alcohol ever affected and it would ask specific questions. And I was real honest on that, most of it. Has alcohol ever affected this area of your life? Yep. And it came to one that said, has alcohol ever affected your sex life? I had a couple days. I looked around. Some of the men were starting to look okay. And I said, lady, you write out to the side of that questionnaire, no. Alcoholism has never affected my sex life. Write my phone number and my prices. Because I don't want these men to think that I can't perform. They told me I had to take those copies of those back away from the men I'd given them to. See, I've done one thing right since I walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. One thing on a daily basis. I haven't taken a drink. I've done everything else sober I ever did drunk. I have not taken a drink of alcohol. I stayed sober through the wisdom and the strength of the York Street group for 6 months. And I was approached by the Narcotics Division of the Denver Police Force and told I had to leave Denver. I thought, man, this is a kick. I haven't done anything for 6 months and they're kicking me out of Denver. I've been kicked out of both Kansas cities, but I knew why. But to be kicked out of a place where I hadn't done anything for 6 months really threw me for a loop. And I said, okay, big boys, where am I going to go? And they said, Cricket, you're moving to Fort Worth, Texas. Wait a minute. Drunk, I didn't go to Texas. Sober, you're telling me I have to move to Fort Worth? And they said, yeah. And I said, I'll make a deal with you fellas. I'll go on 3 conditions. I want a high school diploma, and I want 3 cases of the softest toilet paper made by mankind. I grew up with outhouses and magazine pages, and I heard about the corn cobs in Texas, and I believed it. I really believed it. And I want a car with a driver's license. The very next morning, these police officers took me to a lady. She read me a little questionnaire, and she looked at me about 30 minutes later and said, congratulations, you've just passed your GED. I don't know why the rest of you make a big deal out of taking a GED. They bought me 3 cases of real soft toilet paper, and they bought me a 58 Rambler station wagon. And they told me, this is how you do this deal. And I'd never driven a car. I don't have a DWI. Never. But I still qualify for this fellowship. I got in that station wagon. I've got 2 legs. It had 3 pedals. And I thought, the nuts always govern the nuts and tell the nuts where to go and what they can do and how to do it. And these men are telling me all you got to do is pull this little handle up here all these different directions and you'll get to Fort Worth. And I went to take my driving test. And I went on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I went in on Friday morning to take my driving test. And all these cops looked at each other and they kind of turned clammy and pale and said, I'm not getting in the car with her again. But this one old police officer looked at the others and he said, no problem, I'll get in the car with her, boys. And he went out there and we got in the car and he said, Cricket, turn on the ignition. And I did. And he looked at me, he said, you passed your driving test. The others just didn't know how to give the test. When we went back in to get my driver's license, I heard this gentleman say to the others, fellas, the minute she gets her license, she has to leave Denver. They gave me that GED. I've since gone back. I took a GED. I passed it. It's mine. I have that today. I've also taken a driving test. I passed it. It's mine. They handed me those things to get rid of me. They gave me directions to get to Fort Worth, Texas. And part of their directions included, and you can't do it, It's just not reasonable to go to Fort Worth through Lake Whitney. But that's what they told me I had to do because there was a gentleman there named Bob W. And I had to go by and meet Bob W. And I don't know why, but that's what the police told me, so that's what I was going to do. So I got in that station wagon, had my high school diploma, my GED, and my toilet paper, and I headed to Lake Whitney. And I drove up in front of a little real estate office, and I honked on my horn, and this great big white-haired man came out to my car, and he said, "Hi, I'm Bob W." And I said, "Who gives a..." And he said, "You must be Cricket." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "Can I do anything for you?" And I said, "I doubt it." "No, I don't want anything from you. Don't need you. I was supposed to stop and see you. I've seen you. No big deal." Now I'm on my way to Fort Worth. And I drove into Fort Worth, Texas. The way I drove that car caused it never to go anywhere else again. I did the next thing the police officers told me to do. When I got to Fort Worth, Texas, I was told to call Southwest Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I found a little room, and I paid the rent on it, and I went down to get into my car, and it wouldn't start. And I called Southwest Group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a gentleman named Dave B. answered the phone. And I really think we should give lessons on AA phone service. I don't think you should ever say, "AA? It sounds too happy. You know, it sounds like you may care. It sounds too polite." But that's what he said, Southwest Group AA. And I said, "I need directions." He said, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm here." "Could you please be a little more specific?" "I'm on the east side of Fort Worth, and I need to get to the Southwest Group." He said, "Do you need a ride?" I said, "Mister, I don't need anything from you. I ask you for directions. Can you handle that?" And so I hitchhiked from the east side of Fort Worth to the southwest side of Fort Worth, and I went to my first AA meeting in Fort Worth, Texas, with 6 months of continuous sobriety, and a red-headed lady named Nadine walked up to me and said, "Hi, darling," and hugged me, and I knocked her on her rear end. I stayed sober at Southwest Group for 7.5 years. I had a real problem with Al-Anons. Not because of the Al-Anon, but because of what the AAs told me about them. They're sicker than we are. No Al-Anons ever told me that, but nobody ever has told me that we're more intelligent than the normal person except an alcoholic. You know, I hear that in AA meetings all the time. We're probably drunk because we're more intelligent than most people. Maybe you are. I'm pretty, I just don't qualify for that. Or we have a gentler spirit. Tell that to someone you set fire to their house. Sorry, it was just my gentle nature creeping out. Tell that to a child that you grabbed and you shook him and you couldn't stop yourself. It was just my gentle nature. Tell that to somebody that you've hurt their soul and turned and walked away. It was just my gentle nature. No, friends, it was my alcoholism. It was my alcoholism. I resented Al-Anon so bad that I went to Harris Hospital in Fort Worth, and I walked up to this man. I said, "Sir, would you please tell me where your intensive care unit is?" And he said, "Well, sure, ma'am. It's right behind that sign on that door." I stole the sign, and I went back to my group, and I hung it on the Al-Anon room door. I don't know about other AA groups, but our groups in Fort Worth, we like to make the Al-Anons walk through us if they're late to get to their room in the back. So the ones who got there on time didn't see the sign. But there's always a latecomer for an AA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting. When they shut their door and the latecomer came in, there was this big sign, intensive care unit. She must have said something to somebody, because our meeting hadn't been going on about 5 minutes, and one of the Al-Anon bleeding deaconesses came to our room and said, "What's the sign?" And I looked up and I said, "I did it." And she said, "Oh, okay," and went back into her meeting. This same Al-Anon and I thought she was cuter than I thought she was. Every Thursday night when we allowed them to have their weekly meeting, she would sit on a flower ledge outside their plate glass window, where I'm sure it was the Al-Anons who planted the flowers. The alcoholics probably built the wall. She had a habit Thursday night of wearing a skirt. And she'd go to that flower ledge and she'd put her hands like this and hoist herself up and cross her knees and sit there for public attraction as people walked into meetings. And I really had a problem with it. And so I went over one Thursday afternoon with a hammer and a chisel, and I chiseled out the top row and set them back real neatly. I was just a baby in the program. I only had 7 years. This woman walked in that Thursday night. I still love it. She did her hands that way. She hopped up and crossed her knees and fell and broke her leg. I said, "I did it." "Oh, it's no big deal, Cricket." You know, no big deal. I was escorted by male alcoholics in and out of meetings. I destroyed discussion groups. I stole your money. I lied to you. I cheated you. I ran away newcomers. I ran away old-timers. I hurt Al-Anons, Alateens, and Alatots, and it's okay? No. A year later, somebody burned Southwest to the ground. Of course, you know who they thought did it, but I didn't. Okay? This was one time in my life I was innocent. And I went over there, and I didn't realize what that group had meant to me. See, I didn't start becoming aware of anything till I had about 2 years of continuous sobriety. And I think a lot of that was the medication given to me in the hospital. A lot of it was shock treatments 3 times a week. And the majority of it was daily alcoholism. I walked into Southwest Group, and it was just ashes. And I walked from that front door where I'd walked every night for 7.5 years. And something inside of me felt something. And I walked back to the back. And I remembered the people that we'd seen go into convulsions during our meetings. And I remember the women that had cried at their first meeting. And something inside of me felt something. The group had to find a new place to meet. And I couldn't be a part of it. Something inside of me stopped me from making that move. We have another group in Fort Worth, Texas called the Harbor Group. My first 7.5 years in Fort Worth, I was told, you don't go to Harbor, Cricket, because you won't fit in. Because the women there are lady drunks. They're lady alcoholics. They dress better than you do. They're more intelligent than you are. They won't talk to you or have anything to do with you. Because, see, they've got class. They've got dignity. And they don't associate with low-bottom drunks. And so for 7.5 years, I didn't go to Harbor Group. For 7.5 years, I didn't have a sponsor. For 7.5 years, you were the only big book I knew. Yours was the only message I heard. With 8 years of continuous sobriety, I walked into Harbor Group, and a red-haired lady named Betty G., in her late 60s, came walking up to me and she said, "Hi, Cricket, I'm Betty G." And I thought, "Lady, don't touch me. I really don't want to knock you on your rear end." And she looked at me and she said, "Cricket, darling, I'm real scared of you." And I said, "Lady, that's probably real wise." And she said, "But see, I'm going to be your sponsor." Well, you just told me that you're scared of me and you want to be my sponsor. I've got 8 years, don't need anything from anybody. Do you understand that? She says, "Yeah. Yeah, I do. Cricket, I want to take you back here because Harbor is a club that our group rents from." And she took me back into this little office area. And she handed me the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she opened it. And she said, "Cricket, read me the first portion of chapter 5. And if I know you know what you're talking about, I'll leave you alone." I said, "Okay, lady, I'll do that." And I read to her, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not." And I read on and on. Betty G took the book from me and she said, "Cricket, darling, you don't know how to read." I said, "Yeah, I do, lady. I just read you the first portion of chapter 5. She says, "It was turned to chapter 3. And it was like somebody had kicked me in my guts. Nobody knew. What little knowledge I had, shock treatments erased. I could not read, write, or spell, but I could sure con you into thinking I could. I was functionally illiterate." And I said, "What are you going to do about that, lady?" And she said, "Cricket, I'm going to take you to Texas Christian University." I thought, "You've just told me I was dumb, and you're taking me to Texas Christian University? That's where all the real smart kids go to college." It's not true. The real rich kids go to college at TCU. The smart ones go to the junior colleges and save their money for the last 2 years. That's an opinion. It's not in the book. She took me to TCU, and there was a little lady there in her 70s, and she was no bigger than a minute. And she said, "Cricket, I'm going to teach you how to read." I said, "I don't care." And she said, "It's not a problem, Cricket. You only need to know 26 things, because there's only 26 letters you'll ever have to learn. Each letter has either 1 or 2 sounds, and each letter only has one name. The letter A will always look like this or like this, and it will always only make 2 sounds, A or A." I thought, wow, nobody ever told me that before. Nobody. Betty would not help me learn to read, but she introduced me to the teacher who could. And I sat there on a daily basis with 9 and 10-year-old children, and it's called remedial reading. I call it a miracle of life. I watched a little TV monitor, and I looked at that screen one day, and 3 letters popped up. B-A-T. I went, bat. Bat. I don't know if you understand what that did for me. Those letters joined hands. They became a word that I knew the meaning of. They became a word I would recognize wherever I went for the rest of my life, God willing. I could read this book. It wasn't your book anymore. It was also Cricket's book at this same group that I had been told not to go to. The old-timers, men and women, sat with me on a daily basis and taught me how to add, how to subtract, how to multiply and how to divide, how to write and how to spell. I still receive a monthly subscription to Reader's Digest. My sponsor told me I had to take that vocabulary word every month, that test. Okay? From 8 years of sobriety to 22. The first month, 0. On up for about a year. Now, I usually get 17 or 18 of those words right. Not because of me, but because I had a sponsor who did more than care about walking me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. More about than just learning the traditions and the concepts of service. I had a sponsor who took what another woman had given physical life to and made it into a human being. I had a sponsor who told me I could not dress inappropriately any longer. I had a sponsor who told me I could not use bad language from behind the podium or at discussion meetings. I had a sponsor who told me I could not steal any longer. I had a sponsor who told me I had to quit hitting men and women upside the head if they said if something I didn't like. I had a sponsor who told me it was not fair to slap someone's hands when they wanted to hold mine in the Lord's Prayer with 8 years of continuous sobriety. But I was still a baby in the fellowship. My sponsor gave to me something that nobody can take away from me. My sponsor was a judge's daughter. She had a master's degree in something, you know, and she took nothing, which I was, and began teaching me. She took me with 8 years of continuous sobriety to step 1. And I read it in the book. It had a new deal for me. See, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol and that my life was unmanageable. That wasn't any big deal. It was a spiritual deal. It was a surrender. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. It wasn't something to cause judgment. I admitted that I was powerless over alcohol and my life was unmanageable with 8 years of continuous sobriety. My sponsor then took me all the way through all of the steps of this fellowship. She told me that I was valuable. She told me that I was important. She told me not to bleach my hair blonde, not to buy brown contact lenses. See, I always wanted to be Elizabeth Montgomery. I was going to flatten the chest of every woman but mine. And I was going around wah-woom. And the men would really like me because I'd have them and you wouldn't. And she told me that's not what mattered. It didn't matter what the outside of cricket was all about. It mattered that the inside of cricket had been fragmented and torn to shreds before sobriety and after sobriety because of the disease of alcoholism. I had to do a 5th step with my sponsor. And I had to go way back, up to the day I did the 5th step. And she told me that half measures would avail me nothing. That I had to be willing to make direct amends to anybody I'd ever injured in my entire life. And I said, okay, but how do I make some of these? Because, see, I used to steal Social Security checks out of the mail. Now they deposit them directly in banks. Our government has said that cricket is not responsible. See, I can't help it if I kill you, according to the government. I can't be punished for murder because of my mental record. That's a real scary thing. That's a frightening thing, a frightening power to give to somebody. There's been a lot of people I've been real angry at. And I've really thought, you know, maybe. In fact, my first ex-husband didn't believe me. We were going through a divorce, and he told me he was suicidal and just didn't have the courage. I said, buddy, write a note. It's all the courage you need. I've got a .357 Magnum. He says, oh, you wouldn't want to go to prison. I said, I can't. I can't go to prison. And he said, yeah, they'd put you in prison for murder. I said, no, they wouldn't. 60 days max, my friend. And I know what those shrinks want to hear, and I could tell it to him. Call your lawyer and find out. And he did. And he didn't get suicidal anymore. He got divorced. And he's a good man. But I think even then God knew what he was doing. Even then God knew what he was doing. Because I stole those Social Security checks, and because I could not make direct amends, because I didn't keep a record of who I stole them from, at Harbor Club, every Saturday night, they play a marvelous game called bingo. And it's usually the senior citizens in our group that play bingo. And so my sponsor told me I had to go down every Saturday night for 7 years and call bingo. You know, and I'm just a baby in the program. I only have 10 years at the time. I say, wait a minute, lady. And she said, that's direct amends. Guess what I did every Saturday night for 7 years? I called bingo. The lady became ill with arterial sclerosis, and she needed cricket. She didn't tell me she needed me in so many words. She said, I don't know how I'm going to get to the doctor this week. I don't know how I'm going to get to the laundromat. It sure is hard to get up and do my breakfast. But see, once again I'd gone before this thing called God. And I had several years of continuous sobriety. And I said something to the effect of, Dear God, sir, I don't know if I believe in you. And I don't know if you are. And I don't know if you remember me. But, sir, I'd like you to ask you to help me feel again. I'm not asking for any special favors. I'm not asking you not to help me, not to make me feel bad. Just help me feel again. And so I started going to my sponsor's house and fixing her breakfast every morning. Going by at noontime and fixing her lunch. Going by at supper time and fixing her supper. Doing her laundry. Taking her to the bank. Taking her to the doctor. See, I never knocked on my sponsor's door. When I opened her door with the key that she had freely given to me and said, Betty G, I'm here. She said, hi, darling. I'm upstairs. Hi, honey. I'm in the kitchen. Betty never said yup to me. Never. And I walked in her home, and I do these things, and on this particular Saturday, she had called me. It was Valentine's Day. She said, you know, I think it'd be real nice to sleep in a lavender nightgown tonight. I said, okay. And she says, and I'd love to have some yellow tulips, live yellow tulips. And I said, okay. And she says, and I'd like to have sausage and biscuits for supper tonight. And I said, okay. You know, there comes a line that even sponsors shouldn't cross. That was 3 things in one day, and I thought that was pretty big time. I found her a lavender nightgown. And I found her 6 live yellow tulips. And I went by her house before bingo, and I cleaned her up, put her in her lavender gown, and put her 6 yellow tulips beside her bed, and I fixed her sausage and biscuits. And she ate them. And I walked her upstairs and put her in her bed, and she looked up at me, and for the millionth time, my sponsor said to me, Cricket, darling, you know I love you. For the first time, I looked down at her, and I said, Betty G, I love you too. And I looked at the cracks in her little wrinkled face. And I looked at a tear streaming its way down that crevice. And I knew the tears my sponsor shed for me, Cricket. I knew the prayers that those lips had uttered for Cricket. I knew that when she became my sponsor, she became the best friend that God could ever give to a female alcoholic like Cricket. When she reached her hand down to a woman in the gutter, in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, she reached it down with love. Did she have class and dignity before I met her? You bet, my friends. Did she turn her back on me? No way. Did she care enough about me to teach me how to dress instead of condemn me because I didn't know how? You bet she did. Did she care enough about me to say, Cricket, your table manners need to be improved. Let me teach you how to eat right instead of not inviting me to lunch? You bet she did. Did she care enough about me to teach me how to walk up to an Al-Anon and say, hi? You bet she did. Did she teach me enough that I can hold your hands during the Lord's Prayer now without trying to wipe your feel off of mine? You bet she did. Did I ever repulse her? No. She helped me get my teeth fixed. I've got teeth because of my sponsor. I can read because of my sponsor. I've got my color of hair that God gave to me because of my sponsor. I'm no taller than when I came into AA. I'm a little chunkier because I only weighed 76 pounds when I got here. I smell better because my top sponsor taught me about bathing. I look older because God did that deal too. This is the picture of Cricket that God wants to paint today. And if you want to talk about high bottom, low bottom, that high bottom didn't lower herself to reach this low bottom. That high bottom brought this bottom up to hers, my friends. And she did it because she was Betty G and I was Cricket. See, I had given birth to a child. And when they put me in the wheelchair to send me home, I was going to drive myself home. And that doctor handed me that baby. I said, wait a minute, sucker. I don't understand. What do you think I'm going to do with that? He said, well, you're going to take it home. He said, yeah, Cricket. I was 37 years of age when I gave birth to this child. And I got home with that baby, and I parked the car, and I went in the house. It was just she and I. And I sat there, and I looked at her, and she looked at me. And I looked at her, and she looked at me. And I thought, there's no way. I'm not touching it. I had one of those things you can carry it in way out here. And she started crying. Babies do that. And I picked that baby up. And I held her hand in my right hand and her butt in my left hand. And I looked down at her. And I started to feel again. I didn't know how to mother. There's a violent Cricket, an ugly Cricket, that can't stop herself when she starts doing wrong. I didn't want to hurt that baby. I don't hurt people because I don't love them. Love has nothing to do with sickness and insanity. Love has nothing to do in the scale of it. The baby started crying and crying and crying. I called Betty G. I said, Betty G, I'm going to kill this baby. She said, oh, no, darling, you wouldn't do that. I said, yeah. See, I'm going to pick her up, and I'm going to start shaking her, and I won't be able to stop me. 2 people from that same group of better thans came to my house. They had me call the pediatrician and tell him what I was feeling. The pediatrician said to me, Cricket, when the baby cries, put her in the crib and you go outside. Is that amazing? A doctor knows what to do with a lunatic like Cricket. My sponsor knew what to do by sending these other two people to my home. I have never hurt my daughter physically. I've naturally hurt her just because we're two different people. I have spanked my child. I have disciplined my child. But in anger, I have never grabbed her and hit her and hit her and hit her. Is that because I'm a good person? It's because I had a good sponsor. See, I don't start the action. Then I don't have to worry about getting the control back again. On this particular Saturday night, as you've seen the picture of what my sponsor had to deal with, and I told her, Betty, I love you too. And she told me, she said, Cricket, you know about the legacies. Yep, Betty, I know. You know about the traditions. Yeah, Betty, I know. You know about the steps. Yeah, Betty, I know. And she said, you're my legacy, Cricket. You're what God sobered me up for. Everything I've given to you, I've given from the inside out. And what you do with that is your responsibility. And so I tucked her in bed, and I went down and called bingo. I went back the next morning to fix my sponsor's breakfast, and I unlocked her door. I said, Betty G, I'm here. There was no sound. I said, Betty G, it's Cricket. There was no sound. And I went upstairs to her bathroom, and my sponsor died. You know, and she was there. And I looked at her, and I knelt down beside her, and I put my arms around her, and I said, oh, Betty. And I made a phone call. I didn't call 911. I didn't call my sponsor's children. I called Harbor Group. I said, Betty G's dead. And they said, Cricket, we'll be right there. And they were. They came over. They called the ambulance to come and take my sponsor away. They stayed with me through that whole deal. And I thought, when they buried Betty G, that would be it. See, my sponsor taught me how to live, but she also taught me how to die, because she didn't die that day. Just this. Just the outside of Betty died. My sponsor's alive and well. Witness the fact that Cricket with two other friends from Fort Worth is in Reno, Nevada tonight. I made friends from Hawaii. I made black friends. I made white friends. I made young friends. I made gay friends. I made old friends in Reno, because my sponsor's alive and well. I haven't stolen from anyone this weekend, because my sponsor's alive and well. You didn't bring your husband, so I don't know if I would have or wouldn't have. Probably not, because my sponsor's alive and well. I haven't turned over any tables. I haven't hit you. You know why? Because my sponsor's alive and well. She's in here. The Cricket that hid behind the wood stove, that drank herself from being a crop follower's daughter to a Skid Row hooker to get that next drink of alcohol, is also alive and well. That Cricket is right here, and she's also a friend of mine, because a simple turn of my head and I recognize her. And I understand what that Cricket's all about. And I don't want to be that Cricket again. Because of what Betty did for me, I know a new freedom. Has nothing to do with what happened to me as a child. Doesn't matter. It's a done deal. Has to do with what I do with what happened to me as a child. I am responsible today. I am responsible for my sobriety, my sanity, my ability to parent, my ability to be your friend, my ability to get behind the podium when asked anywhere. I am responsible for that. It's not society's responsibility. It's mine. And it's one that I accept joyfully. Nobody ever wanted me to do anything before. I was not only dirty on the outside, I was dirty on the inside. In that big old box of Cricket's life, it was all like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's like God used AA, and He shook that puzzle and shook that puzzle and He shook that puzzle. And He dumped it in the floors of Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly at Harbor Group. And He said, okay, my friends, here it is. Here's Cricket in 1,000 little pieces. How are you going to put her together again? Are you going to start on the outside? Because that's what Cricket's always thought it was. Do you know where Harbor Group started with me? They took the piece of the puzzle that is always the hardest to find, that innermost middle piece, the heart of the Cricket, and they healed it, and the outside is what you see. You know, but they began with the inside of Cricket. There's an old spiritual song that says, once I was blind, but now I see. Do you? Once I was lame, but now I walk. Do you? We all do. Not because we're good women, but we're sick women that have gotten well together. You know? Do you need me? I think so. Do I need you? I know so. And see, I can say that tonight. I didn't ever dislike women. I hated them. I never had a problem with the fact that you dressed better than I did. If I had a way to get in your house, I burned your wardrobe. The Cricket that looked in the mirror one Halloween dressed up and cried because she could still tell it was Cricket looking back is right here. Each woman has a beauty all of her own. You're in the package God designed you in, and you have no right to resent that package, in my opinion. You're exactly the color God designed you, and you have no right to resent that. You're the height. You are what God destined you to be, wants you to be, to your utmost fulfillment, and you don't have to sell yourself to anyone or take yourself from anyone or hide yourself ever. Because you are God's gift to the Cricket coming along. And there will be another Cricket. And you're going to meet her. And you're probably going to be scared of her. Love her into wholeness. Don't lower your bottom. Raise hers to meet yours. Hold her hand. Touch her when she's untouchable. Accept her when she's unacceptable. Love her when she's unlovable. Give to somebody else what you gave to me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be. And I want to thank you for one of the most beautiful weekends I've ever had in my entire life. And God bless.